Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So spoiler season keeps moving on, and I still can't get over the amazing name of Hostile. So if you haven't seen that episode yet, make sure you check it out and find out how you too can beat opponents with a house. Also, from way too early this morning, make sure you check my episode out on Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, an absolutely busted commander. Lear does exactly what blue mages want to do, but also what they don't want to do. And to find out what I mean by that, you've got to check that episode out. And also make sure you check out the episode on Vadrik Astral Archmage. Vadrik is all about power and casting the biggest spells that you have ever seen. Though this episode is not on a commander, it's on an incredibly powerful planeswalker. That's right, Teferi is back. And you might be wondering what exactly I mean by those words in the thumbnail and in the title, and we'll get to that right now. So this brand new Teferi is Teferi who slows the sunset. Now, why exactly does Teferi slow the sunset? Well, maybe Teferi just likes watching the sunset? I don't know. I'm sure there's a magic story reason it's got to do with werewolves. Regardless, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. He's a legendary planeswalker that has 4 starting loyalty, and he costs 2 white-blue. He's got a ton of tiny text, so here we go. His +1 is choose up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target land. Untap the chosen permanents you control, tap the chosen permanents you don't control, you gain 2 life. So essentially, untap up to 3 things or tap up to 3 things. And that can be very powerful in the right deck and with the right cards, and we'll talk about one of those here in a bit. Regardless, Teferi's -2 is look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, and he rests on the bottom of your library in any order. So obviously some untap or control aspects and some card advantage. Yeah, that's pretty good in a planeswalker. But the really exciting thing about this planeswalker has got to be the ultimate. Teferi's ultimate is a -7 that says you get an emblem with untap all permanents you control during each opponent's untap step. And if that wasn't enough, on top of that, you draw a card during each opponent's draw step. So basically, in a way, your opponent's turns are kind of like yours. When they untap their lands, so do you. And when they draw that first card in their turn, so do you. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. If you can get to that ultimate in a game of Commander, good luck to your opponents trying to stop you. Again, you in a way get a turn during every single opponent's turn. Now, obviously, you still do have to obey timing restrictions, so it's not like you can just cast creatures or sorceries or whatnot. But of course, there are also ways to ensure that you can do that, and then you basically have a turn during every single player's turn. And regardless, even without that, yeah, if you've got a bunch of instants in your deck, you can just keep playing on everyone's turn. Now, obviously, Teferi is somewhat reminiscent of another card that I again may or may not have mentioned in the thumbnail or in the title, so let's move on to that card. And that card is, of course, none other than Seedborn Muse. Though Seedborn Muse has been reprinted a few times now, it is still a $10 card, and for good reason. And even with that $10 price tag, it still sees play in 14% of eligible decks. This is simply because it says, untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. Again, in a multiplayer format like Commander, this card is absurd. Again, you get access to all your mana and all your resources on every player's turn. And in a 4-player game, you're essentially getting 3 times as much access to your things as your opponents do to theirs. Now, first up, not only does Teferi do this, but it also lets you draw a card as well during their turn. So just imagine how fun and how powerful that will be when you pull it off. But obviously, again, there is that difference because you do have to pull it off. Seedborn Muse is automatically going to be doing this just by being in play. With Teferi, you actually have to get to that ultimate, and there are ways to obviously help with that, and I'll talk about those here in a bit, but still. That being said, once you do ultimate with Teferi, obviously your opponents aren't going to be able to get rid of that emblem, or at least I'm pretty sure they can't. I don't know of any way to get rid of an emblem. Let me know in the comments below if I'm wrong, other than obviously taking that player out of the game. Anyways, whereas that emblem cannot be dealt with, Seedborn Muse most definitely can. So, though it is going to be harder to pull off that ultimate for Teferi, once you do, the reward is even greater. And it's a reward that is guaranteed to stick around, and once you have that going for you, it's going to be really hard for your opponents to stop you because, yeah, you get basically 4 turns. I mean, even lesser effects than Seedborn Muse still see a good amount of play. For example, Wilderness Reclamation is an enchantment for 3 and a green and says at the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. So first up, this only untaps lands, which is the main thing that you want still, but yeah, not all your other permanents like Seedborn Muse, and secondly, this only happens once. You get access to your lands one additional time, which is still fantastic, but still, in comparison to Seedborn Muse or Teferi, this isn't giving you much. Again, that is in comparison though, because this is still a fantastic card and it sees play in 8% of eligible decks. And then Unwinding Clock is more specific but still effective in a lot of decks out there. It's going to untap all artifacts you control during each other player's untap step. So again, more specific than Seedborn Muse or Teferi in that it's only untapping your artifacts. Though for an artifact-centric deck, that might be pretty much everything, well, outside of your lands, although you might have a decent amount of artifact lands in that deck too, so yeah. But yeah, there really aren't many permanents out there that untap your things on your opponent's turns. 2 other quick examples that deal with creatures are Quest Renewal and Murkfiend Leech. These can really help out the right deck, but they do have some restrictions themselves. For example, Quest Renewal says, whenever a creature you control becomes tapped, you may put a quest counter on Quest Renewal. And as long as there are 4 or more quest counters on it, untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step. So it might not be all that difficult of a requirement to meet, but you still have to meet it to actually get that effect. And then Murkfiend Leech is more specific. It says untap all green and or blue creatures you control during each other player's untap step. So again, for the right deck, each of these can be effective, and they do see a decent amount of play in those types of decks, but it's not nearly as broad as something like a Seedborn Muse or again, the new Teferi. In fact, I can't think of a deck out there that wouldn't just love to untap everything every turn and draw a card. And because of that, it is a very good thing that that's actually an ultimate that you have to actually work to get to, because if not, well, Teferi would probably just be in every single deck because, yeah, that would be super broken in Commander. That being said, of course, there are some ways that we can speed things up to actually get to that ultimate, but we'll tackle that here in a bit. First up, let's talk about some cards that make things even more absurd after you've got that ultimate off. Vedalken Orrery is unfortunately a very expensive card. I think it's around $30 or so at this point, and it says you may cast spells as though they had flash, so yeah, that's why it's expensive. Playing on other players' turns is a very powerful thing, especially in combination again with Teferi's ult. Essentially again, simultaneously while that player is playing their turn, you essentially get a turn. Just like them, you untap your lands, you draw a card, and you can cast whatever spells you want in your hand without timing restrictions. Now, obviously, yes, there are some minor differences. No, you're not just putting a land drop down and you don't get an upkeep trigger, but still, for all intents and purposes, you get a turn during every other player's turn. And then for decks that have blue, which, okay, I guess, now that I say that, if you're considering Teferi for your deck already has to have blue, so ignore that. Anyways, Ley Line of Anticipation, if it's in your opening hand, you begin with it on the battlefield, which is huge, so yeah, free spell. And it says you may cast spells as though they had flash. So yeah, same as Vedalken Orrery, but with the potential upside of being free. And unlike Vedalken Orrery, this one's a little more budget friendly. I think it's still around $6 or $7, but yeah, nowhere near 30. Now, there aren't too many cards that actually let you play at flash speed like these, but there are a few more that I do want to highlight. For example, Tidal Barracuda is a very interesting card. It says any player may cast spells as though they had flash, except your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. So basically, you can play whenever you want and your opponents can as well, except on your turn. Next up, even some lands can help you out with this, like Alchemist Refuge and Emergence Zone. Alchemist Refuge has pay green, blue, and tap it. You may cast non-land cards this turn as though they had flash. So yes, you do have to pay for this effect, but still, that is very, very powerful. And again, if you've got Teferi untapping your permanents every single turn, I'm sure you can afford it. Regardless, Emergence Zone is another option, though it is a one-time option. By paying 1 and tapping it, you can sack it, and you may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. So again, a one-off effect, but it can be incredibly impactful in the right deck. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are some ways to actually speed up getting to the ultimate, and making that ultimate easier to get to is most definitely worth it for the effect. First up, of course, there's the Chain Veil, and actually, Eddie, really quick, thank you for pointing out the interaction with Teferi in the Chain Veil. That +1 is going to work really well with this. The Chain Veil has pay 4 and tap it. For each planeswalker you control, you may activate one of its loyalty abilities once this turn, as though none of its loyalty abilities have been activated this turn. Basically, extra planeswalker activations. And keep in mind that Teferi's +1 can untap an artifact. And like Eddie pointed out, if you've got a land or a creature that can tap for 4 mana, well, you can just keep doing this as many times as you want. Regardless, even if you can't go infinite with this, it can still help you get to your Planeswalker's ult very quickly. Unfortunately, though, it is a $15 card, but if you've got a Super Friends deck, you very well might have one. Anyways, next up there's Karth the Lion, which yes would require you to be also in black and green, but if you're playing 5-color Super Friends, there you go. Or I guess even 4-color Super Friends, and we'll talk about one of those commanders here in a bit that could obviously be a fit for this. Regardless, Karth the Lion says, Planeswalker's loyalty abilities you activate cost initial +1 to activate. So basically, when we +1 Teferi, now instead it's a +2. And this also makes Teferi's -7 into just a -6. Again, remember that Teferi starts off at 4 starting loyalty, so again, the +1, which is now a +2, takes it to 6, which again is all we need for the ult. So instead of having to wait multiple turns for that ult, we can do it next turn as long as Teferi keeps the loyalty counters on. Another card that can most definitely help with our Planeswalker ult, though, is Deep Glow Skate. It has, when it enters the battlefield, double the number of each kind of counter on any number of target permanents. So if we get Teferi in play and then this, congratulations, free ult. And speaking of free ultimates for Planeswalkers, of course I've got to bring up Doubling Season, though I think it's like a $50 card or something at this point. Just looked it up, I was way off, my apologies. It's a $75 card. And for good reason. It says if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead, which, yes, is nice, but not all that relevant for this. But what part is relevant is, if an effect would put 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it puts twice that many of those counters on that permanent instead. Basically, free Planeswalker ultimates, including Teferi's. So now instead of coming in with 4 starting loyalty, he comes in with 8. So he can ult right away and still stick around, which is absurd. So yeah, there's a reason that even though Doubling Season has been reprinted, it is still a $75 card. Regardless, now that we've talked about some cards that can help Teferi with his ult, let's talk about some commanders that might want to make use of Teferi in the 99 of their decks. And of course, first up, there's Atraxa, Praetor's Voice. Atraxa has at the beginning of your end step, Proliferate. And that basically means we choose any number of permanents or players, then each of them get an extra counter of any kind there. So Atraxa is a pretty popular Super Friends commander because, yeah, we can get more loyalty counters on our Planeswalkers. And with this and other proliferate effects, we can get Teferi up to 7 very quickly. Next up though, let's talk about a newer Super Friends commander in a 5-color 1-at-bat with Esika, Gone of the Tree, or should I say, the Prismatic Bridge. The Prismatic Bridge says, at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal a card from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or Planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Or in a Super Friends deck, hey, at your upkeep, get Planeswalkers off the top for free. Next up, Sisay Weatherlight Captain can also get Planeswalkers out, though you do have to pay for it. By paying white, blue, black, red, green, you can search your library for a legendary permanent card with converted mana cost less than Sisay's power, put that card right on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And Sisay actually can boost her own power by getting +1/+1 for each color among other legendary permanents you control. So to get Teferi out, obviously Sisay's power would have to be 5, and that's not going to be all that difficult in this kind of a deck. Finally, even a commander like Wrath Capuchin might want to consider this one. Wrath Capuchin says you may cast historic spells as though they had flash. So yeah, Planeswalkers, they are legendary, therefore they are historic. And if you can ult Teferi with this as your commander, you're going to be having a great time. Again, giving your spells flash is incredible with Teferi's ult. But now it's time for me to wrap this episode up and give you my final thoughts on Teferi, who slows the sunset. And I still kind of laugh at that name a little bit because, again, Teferi just likes watching sunsets. Who knew? Regardless, this seems like a very powerful Planeswalker and one that is probably going to fit into a lot of Super Friends builds. If you can ult with it, you're probably going to win the game. Again, just because you get access to all your resources and an extra card on everyone else's turn. So yeah, if you see Teferi come down on the other side of the table, you should probably do your best to not allow him to ult. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.